Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, May 9th, 2021, and today I'm going to be talking about Hillary Clinton and her 2016 election performance. Now, the reason why I want to bring her up is because there's been all this discussion about why Joe Biden underperformed her in terms of performance amongst minority voters. But I think the argument and the position that the Democratic Party had was that Donald Trump made more inroads rather than the fact that Hillary Clinton might have been a stronger candidate than Joe Biden pertaining to minority voters. And I think that the latter is true. Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party, their campaign of 2016 painted Donald Trump in a very, very negative issue, specifically amongst minority voters. There are a number of things that I do want to unpack, but pretty much we're going to be comparing the Clinton 2016 campaign versus the Biden 2020 campaign and just talking about why we saw a pretty significant decrease in support amongst, not super significant, incremental, I will say. We're talking about single digits in terms of the change of support, but you still recognize it. I'm not going to say overwhelmingly significant because obviously Joe Biden won the election and he was still able to win these minority groups by astounding margins, the smallest being a 14-point margin of victory, and then going up to 27, 33, and then 75. But there's still some worries here amongst the Democrats that if they don't recover back to their levels and the Republicans recover back to their support amongst white voters, it will land them in the same type of loss that Hillary Clinton had in 2016, or potentially even worse, considering the fact that she actually won more of the minority vote than Joe Biden did. So on your screen right now, you're looking at the 2016 Hillary Clinton campaign website. I honestly just have it back here just so you can get a general idea of what things looked like back then, take you a little bit back to 2016. But there was a pretty significant difference in terms of the amount of support, at least nationally speaking. Hillary Clinton, of course, lost the election. We saw her lose Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, all states that Biden had won in the 2020 election. And, you look at this and say, obviously, Joe Biden was the better candidate, right? I mean, he had a much better performance than she did. I mean, the numbers exactly flipped, and she only won the popular vote by 2 points versus him winning by 5 points. And he won 5 states that she didn't. So you might think that this was just a drastically different scenario, but it actually only happened because of one major demographic group that turned the tides in favor of Joe Biden. Now, I'm not trying to discount any of the efforts by organizers of the Democratic Party to bring out minority voters, but what I am going to point out is that the Democratic Party did not perform as well as they did in 2016, and what that actually could have meant for 2020 had they won by the same amount, or if the white vote had voted in the same way it did for Donald Trump in the 2016 election. The reality of the American electorate is that minority voters always vote for the Democrats. White voters always vote for the Republicans. The white demographic group in our nation is the only demographic group that consistently votes for the Republican Party on the presidential level in most cases. I mean, if you're looking at the numbers here, amongst white voters, Donald Trump still won them by 17 points. When you look at the racial breakdown in terms of black voters, Latino voters, Asian voters, and other ethnic groups, you'll realize that the margins for Biden are absolutely insane. Plus 75 amongst black voters, plus 33 amongst Hispanic voters, plus 27 amongst Asian voters. But right under the bold text here, you will see a gray percentage that tells you the percentage of the electorate that these groups made up. So while white voters may be the only demographic group on here out of the 5 mentioned, they make up 2/3 of the entire electorate, and other estimations put them up as high as 71%. In 2016, we saw a very similar thing. 71% of the electorate was white. Donald Trump won them by 20 points. So while Clinton did underperform Biden in terms of white voters, the main reason why the country still skews to the right is because of white voters. That was what my major point was. But now we're going to go ahead and compare the numbers because I just showed you how large Biden's victories were amongst minority groups. But amongst Hillary Clinton, she did better. We're going to be moving back and forth and pretty much analyzing each of the demographic groups because they did decrease on every group except for white voters. And I think that's what we saw happen in the 2020 election. I'll show you what happened on the electoral map and why some states actually didn't budge as much as they should have or actually skewed towards the right. So, 2016, Hillary Clinton wins black voters by 81%, Joe Biden by 75%. Both absolutely amazing margins for the Democrats, but there's a clear difference. Amongst Hispanic voters, Hillary Clinton won them by 38 percentage points. Joe Biden only won them by 33 points. Asian voters were won by 38 points by Hillary Clinton. Asian voters won by Joe Biden by 27 points. So there were super significant differences between 2020 and 2016 amongst Asian voters. Amongst Hispanic voters, are reduced by 5. Amongst Black voters, are reduced by 6. And then the other race/other ethnic group, Hillary Clinton won by 20 points based off the CNN exit poll. And then Biden won that by 14 by the CNN exit poll 4 years later. So a significant decrease in terms of Asian voters. That was 11 points. That was the major one, but that was only 4% of the electorate. But incremental yet noticeable decrease amongst every other demographic group, -6 amongst Black voters, -5 amongst Hispanic voters, and -6 amongst other ethnic groups. So pretty much Joe Biden did worse. The only group he did better in, which actually landed him the victory, is white voters. And that's because they make up a minimum of 2/3 of the electorate. So the Hillary Clinton campaign of 2016 was largely focused on tapping into that 2012 base of the white working class as well as minority voters. Now this may come as a surprise, but also maybe not after just looking at some of those 2016 numbers. But Hillary Clinton in many states outperformed Barack Obama amongst every minority group, even Black voters, which I think really goes against the stereotype and the expectation, knowing that Hillary Clinton had lost against Donald Trump. Realistically speaking, she wasn't that bad of a candidate for minority voters. She did better than Biden, and this was something that we probably could have expected. Hillary Clinton won minority voters pretty much almost every demographic group by the end of the 2016 Democratic presidential primary. She swept the South. She was able to win in states by larger margins than Obama was against her in 2008, and I think she was able to tap into this in the 2016 election. But the killer was turnout. They weren't necessarily as inspired because this was an election that was decided between the lesser of two evils, but those who did turn out did skew towards the left. The Democrats were able to drive up turnout in 2020, but so was the GOP. It was a high turnout election for both sides, and minority groups actually shifted towards the right. So for Hillary Clinton's sake, I'm going to sit here and tell you, honestly speaking, she wasn't that bad for minority voters. They actually liked her. If you look at some of these states, in specific Florida, Donald Trump won the state by 1.2%. Yes, it's a loss, but comparing it to the 2020 margin in Florida, this is a perfect example of the reduction of support amongst minority voters for the Democrats. Donald Trump actually wins the state by 3.3%. And also, I think that we ignored many of the gains that Hillary Clinton made because of her ability to win over Black voters by a large margin, Hispanic voters by a large margin. Yes, it was a combination of Trump being a bad candidate for some of these states, which I'll show you in just a moment, but also a combination of Hillary Clinton being a good one, at least for minority voters. Arizona, Georgia, and Texas, one of the few states that actually shifted to the left following the 2012 election. Donald Trump only won Arizona by 3.5%. Romney was winning it by nearly 9 in 2012. Same story in Georgia, a state that Romney won by around 9 points. Donald Trump won by just 5.1%. Same thing. Looking over in Texas, a state with a very large Hispanic population, Hillary Clinton only lost the state by 9 points. Barack Obama had lost the state by 16 points. Fast forward to 2020, some of the gains that were made amongst white voters were counteracted by the entire shift amongst the southern border amongst Hispanic voters, but it still reduced to a 5.6% margin of victory for the Republicans. So Hillary Clinton started this trend of Arizona and Georgia getting bluer. I think it was a combination of her and Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump really expedited it, but I'm not going to take away any type of credit away from her because I do think that she did offer more of a platform, and the Democratic Party had a better campaign in 2016 for minorities than they did in 2020. And I also mentioned this in another video before. I mentioned this crying wolf effect amongst the Biden-Harris campaign. They argued that if Donald Trump was to be reelected, that he would be the worst president for minority citizens. Now, I'm going to tell you this, being someone who comes from a family with, plenty of minorities, me being one myself. And I'm going to tell you that when the Democratic Party made this argument, pretty much saying in 2016, if Donald Trump wins, every minority citizen's way of life will be upended. The entire society, for minorities in particular, people of color, will change. But when that didn't exactly happen, and it wasn't as drastic as the Clinton campaign and the Democratic Party made it seem, these voters were reluctant to believe them again in 2020. Now, of course, the pandemic was a major thing. That was a determining factor in why Donald Trump lost. But this campaign, this style that replicated 2016, wasn't usable again because they tried to rerun the campaign that proved to be not necessarily as true as they wanted it to be. The Democratic Party hoped that minority voters would actually skew further to the left in 2020 because Kamala Harris was on the ticket, because of this major uptick in turnout, because of all of this energy around the election, one of the most important elections of our lifetimes, but it didn't. Largely because what I think is that crying wolf effect, where the Democratic Party made this argument under Hillary Clinton and it worked, but then it didn't work in 2020 because they tried to rerun the same exact thing. And if you look at the change from 2012, Miami-Dade County actually shifted to the left, while the rest of the state shifted to the right because Barack Obama had won the state of Florida, Hillary Clinton did not. Miami-Dade County narrowly shifted to the left. Well, I want to show you what happened to Miami-Dade County in 2020. It shifted to the right 22 points. A very large Hispanic population in Miami-Dade County landed Joe Biden less votes than Hillary Clinton, despite the turnout in the state increasing significantly. Joe Biden received 617,000 votes. Yes, that's a lot. Hillary Clinton, however, received 624,000 votes in 2016. Well, how about Donald Trump? In 2016, Donald Trump received 334,000 votes in Miami-Dade County. How many did he receive in 2020? Well, Joe Biden reduced. Doesn't it make sense for Donald Trump to reduce? Absolutely not. Donald Trump received 533,000 votes in Miami-Dade County, an increase of 199,000 votes, where Joe Biden decreased 8,000 votes. That's embarrassing for the Democrats. And it wasn't just here. We saw it happen in Texas. While the state itself shifted to the left, that was because mainly of white voters. Let's take a look at Starr County, a perfect example. A very large Hispanic population all across the southern border, every single county shifting to the right by a lot. Starr County, 55 points more Republican. Kennedy County, 40 points more Republican. You have so many counties that are shifting 20, 30 points towards the right because the Democratic Party didn't have the same type of energy and same type of fear in a lot of these citizens' minds that they did in 2016. In addition, it did not help that Joe Biden did not try to dispel this rumor that he was a socialist. That is a message that does resonate amongst minority groups. I'm telling you that in full honesty. Joe Biden did not do enough. He laughed it off. When they said, "Are you a socialist?" he said, "I beat the socialist. How could I be a socialist?" Well, that's not enough. When you have this strategy employed by the Republicans for decades, labeling the Democrats as communists and socialists, it eventually will catch on. And 2020 was the first year where we saw a direct negative implication of that being tied onto a Democrat, at least in the 21st century. They've always tried to tie it on to Al Gore, John Kerry, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, but it didn't work because all of those Democratic nominees before were more right-wing than Joe Biden. Well, fast forward to 2020, Joe Biden believes in a lot more left-wing things than he did possibly 8 years ago, and then the Democratic Party did 8 years ago, or even 4 years ago. Joe Biden was labeled as a socialist, and while anyone on the left would laugh at that, those who are afraid of the idea of socialism, or this negative connotation that comes with the word, being attached onto Joe Biden, makes them less and less likely to view him as a good president or vote for him in general. There were a number of things that impacted the 2016 and 2020 election, but I don't think that Hillary Clinton performed nearly as bad as we might think amongst minority groups. I mean, she did better than Barack Obama in many, many states, and he was the candidate that drove them up to high turnout for the first time in a long time. In 2012, actually, Black voters had surpassed white voters in terms of overall turnout for the first time in United States history. So Obama certainly was ramping up that turnout and bringing them out to vote, but Hillary Clinton won them by a larger margin. It's kind of interesting that when you have higher turnout amongst minority groups, the vote share for the Democratic Party actually seems to decrease. But that's just because of the amount of people voting. But you're talking about, tens of thousands of more people voting, and that 80 to 20 margin, while isn't as good as an 85 to 15 margin, wins you the state versus losing the state by just around a few percentage points. Georgia and Arizona are perfect examples of how higher turnout, despite the margin being narrower, could actually win the state for the opposition party, and in this case being the Democratic Party. But I just wanted to point out the differences between Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden and discuss briefly why we actually saw this happen and what this meant for Hillary Clinton and why history probably will be very kind to her, speaking about her election performance. Obviously, it was a loss that was, I would also determine to be embarrassing. Donald Trump was viewed as this candidate that could never win. But going back and looking at the margins for Hillary Clinton among certain demographic groups, it was honestly just Donald Trump's ability to tap into the white working class that was unmatched for any other Republican in history, in modern history. I'm not going to say in history for obvious reasons, but recently speaking, at least I'm going to say 21st century, not just modern history, because that can go back even further. But pretty much, Hillary Clinton lost the white working class, but was able to win in certain states, sometimes among certain demographic groups, by larger margins than Obama, and in every case, larger margins than Joe Biden. Different campaigns, different circumstances, but that's something that can be attributed to Hillary Clinton that I really think isn't discussed enough, largely because she lost to Donald Trump, but it's a campaign and it's a strategy that needs to be tapped into the future, even if it was a part of a losing campaign. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.